Okay, so hi and welcome to the first Real Creative Futures Digital Ideas and Insights session. My name's Ellen. I'm the Creative Business Coach at Real Creative Futures Digital, and I'm joined today by three of our wonderful specialist coaches, Tina Smith, Debbie Bryan and Bev Shephard, who I'll introduce shortly. And today we're going to be talking about cash flow, funding and kind of money tips in general. Just a quick intro on the programme. So Real Creative Futures Digital is a free tailored business support programme for creative businesses in Nottingham, and the team is based at the New Art Exchange in Hyson Green, Nottingham, which is an internationally renowned and award-winning gallery and performance space. And through the programme we offer free coaching, networking opportunities, training, showcasing, and now a digital series of resources, which is really exciting. And we're part of a much bigger programme called The Big House, which is a 3-year, £5 million programme to provide free business support to creative businesses in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire. And we're very proud to be supported by Midlands Engine, who are our local economic partnership, and the European Regional Development Fund. So welcome, ladies. Before we get into the meat of our chat about money, it would be lovely just to have an intro from each of you. So I'm going to come to Tina first. Tina, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Tina. I've been freelance for about the last 10 years, and basically I do a lot of work in terms of writing funding bids. This is for mainly public funding bids, usually Arts Council, so project grants, developing your creative practice. I've worked on quite a few capital projects as well. Currently I'm working with a theatre company and a dance company. Prior to that I've worked with UK Young Artists. I've also worked at the Arts Council for around 15 years as an artistic assessor, and I've worked for Real Creative Futures for about a year, mentoring and supporting artists and organisations to look at whether they're funding ready, and looking at different options for funding, predominantly Arts Council funding.
Excellent, thank you, Tina. And over to Bev.
Hi, I'm Bev Shephard. I'm a freelance consultant. I specialise in strategy, finance, HR. I've been freelance for about 5 years, and prior to that I was finance director of quite a big charity in the East Midlands. I've got my pet project is Harlem Art Space in Wirksworth, Derbyshire, and when I went freelance I wanted something to keep me busy if there were quiet days, and so we founded artist studios and a public gallery, and we now have 40 artists and in a beautiful old archite mill in Wirksworth. I work a lot in the art sector, creative industries, but I've got public sector and third sector, private sector experience as well. I also work as an interim finance director, so if there are businesses that are growing and need a couple of days a month of a senior finance director, then I will go in and step in and do that work until they get to a size where they can take on a part-time member of staff. I've been working with Real Creative Futures for, again, probably about a year, largely doing mentoring, a lot of it around strategy and a lot of it around fundraising.
Excellent, thank you. And finally, Debbie.
Hello. So my business is called Debbie Bryan, and we manage creative and commercial projects in the UK and overseas. And we've also got a really beautiful gallery, tea room and creative space in Nottingham's Lace Market. And my job, what I do there is I kind of oversee everything, and I also create the opportunities. I go out there and I suppose come up with the new ideas of how we're going to grow the business moving forward. I also design and make collections for the gallery, so I'm really lucky I still get to kind of do some hands-on making. And I also write and deliver creative and enterprise programs, and we've done some really great projects here in Nottingham and also overseas as well. My role at Real Creative Futures is as a specialist coach and mentor, and I'm really looking forward to putting my training and experience from running my own business to support kind of fellow creatives to achieve their goals.
Amazing, thank you. I don't know if you can hear, but my neighbour's daughter's doing her trumpet practice just outside. So might have a music tune as we go through today. Always good to have a bit of creativity in the background. Okay, so we had a few questions sent in to us from some of our participants. So you can imagine cash flow is on everyone's mind at the moment, so we thought we would kick off with that. And I wanted to start with you, Debbie, and ask if you could share some of your top tips for managing cash flow in this tricky times, and maybe talk us through some of the things that you've been doing. And I'm going to change the speaker view so that we can see you there.
Yes, I mean we got the news kind of, I think, on the 20th of March that we to close completely. So this would be the gallery and the tea room as well. So we had to close our doors, which meant we potentially could have been giving a lot of refunds. And we also had 3 exhibitions in China planned for this year, which have just not happening. So we've lost that income as well. And because that was actually fully funded, that was a really great kind of opportunity for us sort of to bring finances into the business. So I really had to very quickly kind of confront the reality of the situation, because I do employ people, I do have a lot of bills. So this was going to have a big impact on our finances. So for me, it was all about kind of communication first, and then really focusing on how we negotiate. So how do we talk to, the ladies that have booked afternoon tea that potentially might want a refund, right the way through to navigating conversations with our landlord. So yeah, we had a lot of things to think about, but yeah, luckily, we were eligible for some of the financial packages that the government have kind of implemented, but they were quite slow to come to us. So I think kind of I'm going to add determination and patience to sort of what we were having to think about at that time. So yeah, I think kind of talking to absolutely everyone. So I made a list. I went through my bank account, who's going to be wanting paying, but also I went through all my invoices and just made a massive list of who I needed to talk to, and then really thought about how that conversation would go. And really, it was all about kind of financial resilience, really, So I had to think as well about, have I got the skills actually to navigate through this? So there was a lot of things that I had to think about in a really short length of time, but I wasn't going to work that weekend, so that's kind of how I spent the time, really, getting my head around it all.
That's great, thank you. And I think those points about communication and negotiation are really critical, and that list making sounds like a really practical step. Bev, what would you add to that in terms of kind of managing cash flow?
I mean, if you can, I would consider putting together a cash flow forecast. So to do that, the easiest thing to do is on the spreadsheet. And if you list all of the people that you owe money to and all of the people who owe money to you, and you take note of what is in your bank account at the start of the month, and across the top you can put the dates that you're working with. You can start to work out when money is going to come in and need to go out, and that will give you an indication going forwards about whether that you're going to have a hole to plug. And then you can do as Debbie did, make the list of people that you need to speak to, because sometimes you can delay payments until the last possible moment if it's not going to cause financial hardship, or you can negotiate. If you've actually got a situation where you can't afford to pay your bills, it may be that your landlord, like in Debbie's case, might be a little bit more amenable to giving you a rent holiday or something like that. And where you can, chase payments so that it comes in on time. I think in my experience as a finance director, if bills weren't getting paid, and you're working with an organisation, it really does pay to go and speak to a member of the finance department of the organisation that you're working with. The finance team have often got a handle on where the invoice is in the system, and they are probably much better able to chase it through to being paid than the initial contact who booked you. So I would definitely do that, and I do think by phone, rather than just an anonymous chaser email. I think that personal contact can do wonders for speeding things up. Another thing, if you need to, you could alter the terms on your invoice. Not all people who are paying you are going to pay too much attention to it, especially in times like this. But if you do need to reduce your terms down to, say, 14 days rather than 30, it's not a bad idea to do that too. So those are some ideas.
That's great, thank you. You mentioned doing a cash flow forecast there. Are there any other tools that you would recommend people use or introduce to just to help with the day-to-day management and to keep on top of things?
Yeah, I think if you're a small organisation, I do think a spreadsheet is absolutely perfect. I mean, I use Excel for all sorts of things, but Google Sheets is fine too. If you're a little bit bigger and you want to spend the time investing in a system, then accounts packages are great. They really are good. They help manage your finances really well. But you do need to know a little bit about how you need to set them up in order to get the best out of them. It can be a bit of an investment as well. If you go to the big providers like Sage or QuickBooks or Xero, the systems are wonderful, but you're going to be paying upwards of £30-40 a month to use them. At Harlem we use a free one which is called Wave Apps, and it does pretty much everything that the big players do. But for nothing, so that's great, and it will take care of all of our invoicing, and we've got repeat invoicing, so that's really helpful. It will send out automatic reminders. We can link it to Stripe, so we can get paid really quickly through various by card. And it will give you an indication of cash flow, and of course it keeps track of all of your expenses and provides categorization for you, so you can start to then analyze where you're spending stuff. It is a big investment in terms of time though. If you start it, you have to kind of, it's because you want to stick with it. It's not a temporary solution, but it's great for providing you with good quality information to give to your accountants at year end, and so that can save them a lot of time, which can in turn save you money. I would suggest, if you're going to go down that route, maybe get a little bit of support to implement it to start with. There's nothing worse than having to redo it if you haven't set it up right, because it is a significant investment in time.
That's brilliant, thank you, Bev. And just coming back to you, Debbie, for a moment, you talked about your immediate response to this crisis and some of the things that you put in place. Looking forward, are you going to change the way that you do anything in terms of financial management? Have you noticed that you're doing anything differently to keep on top of things?
Yeah, I think kind of sort of what I have observed is that I really sort of thought about my behaviour when dealing with money, because I think there are times when I've probably been a bit riskier with my investments, because it felt like, oh, actually, I know that we're going to have money coming in, and I think I can't recommend actually keeping an eye on your budget planning and your cash flow during this period, because really you just don't have a business if you've not got money in the bank. But I think kind of I'm really thinking about sort of what changes are happening with me, with how I'm dealing with money. And I think the big one really is that traditionally I, as a person, haven't really been interested in taking a bank loan, or I've had this sort of, I suppose I'm brought up with it really, is that, once you owe money, you're in debt, and that's when the pressure can happen. So, so what it means is that we've always had that little bundle there to weather us a little bit if things have been tough. But I think what I'm kind of coming round to is actually the loans that have become available for small businesses, and the terms are they just seem like this is going to be an amazing investment in the business, because I think what I'm realizing is that for us to, we're having to really think about our business model, and there's a lot of changes we're having to implement, and we'll be needing to invest over the next year probably, to make sure that we're meeting consumer needs and that we're keeping up. And I think actually that is going to require money. And I think actually I want to really accelerate. I don't want to be patient and wait till the money comes in. I actually want to really amplify, what we're wanting to achieve when we actually come back and we're operating properly again. So I think kind of there's been a real shift in how I feel about taking on debt, because that's what it is. It's borrowing money. But I think the first thing for me is I'm going to see if I actually need it. So I think doing the budget planning, doing the cash flow, that's kind of stuff that I really need to be up close with, and having a really honest relationship with it, and keeping the business safe. But I think the loans that are available, I really am going to explore them, because it does feel like if I can build in a forecast that we could be in a position to have repaid that within the 12 months before the interest rate kicks in, then any profit we make it's going to be fantastic. So it is, I am looking at it like it's an investment in the business. And it feels like there's not really been anything like this around before for small businesses. So I feel like this could be a bit of a growth spurt for us as we're coming out of this. I'm feeling quite optimistic.
That's amazing to hear. And I think you're right. I think for some businesses, exploring lending will be appropriate. And I think the point you made about building that into the cash flow planning is the essential thing, isn't it? To check A, if you need it, and B, how and when might you be able to service that and make those repayments. And do you think you'll do a best case and worst case cash flow?
Yeah, I'll do every case, because I'm quite, I am real extremes. I'm like, the wow factor, and, kind of almost like world domination kind of scenario. And then it's like, right, what can go wrong? What's the worst thing that could happen? And I think kind of that's really what I'm working with, is that I remember when I invested in opening the gallery from being a studio practice. It's like, right, if no one actually comes in and buys anything, can we still keep running with the trade business? And that potentially could be the way of thinking of well, and that's why we're looking at digital. That's the one thing that's probably going to keep us going through this. So we're diversifying quite a lot, really, with what our present offer was. So but yeah, I think definitely looking at kind of being ambitious and looking at, well, it could be this. And it's all about possibilities. That's what investment in your business is. It's got to be about what the possibilities that money could bring for you, and how it can sustain you. But I think also we don't know what it's going to be like. We don't know if people are going to, what consumerism means moving forward. So I think kind of baby steps, really small and being very cautious, but also ambitious at the same time,
Yeah, I think big, start small.
Yeah.
Bev, do you have anything to add to cash flow before to a chat about funding and bringing in that type of money?
Something to pick up on what Debbie said about the loan, perhaps, which is, I agree, it's all a matter of risk. And if you can take a pragmatic view of it, look at risk and benefit, and make sure that you're making, you can make ambitious decisions, but you still need to be prudent in them, so that you don't get yourself into hot water. I think that loans can provide an answer for some businesses. Yeah, absolutely.
That's great, thank you. So we'll kind of move the conversation on a little bit and talk about funding. I think we've seen most of the major funders move really quickly, I think, in terms of providing emergency funding applications. And I know many of those are being issued now and have been issued, and we're seeing other things come in their place and other opportunities. So while the emergency funding may be kind of in the moment, I do expect that we'll see some other funding opportunities certainly over the course of next year. So it still feels to me for some artists, for some practitioners, thinking about becoming funding ready is still relevant. So I wanted to come to you, Tina, and draw on some of your kind of fundraising experience, and wondered if we could start with some thoughts about how people could become funding ready. So not necessarily the detail of writing the application, but how do people get themselves in a good position for that?
Yeah, so I mainly support people and organisations in terms of accessing grants. So these are publicly funded grants, predominantly with the Arts Council, so project grants or developing your creative practice. But also I've worked with many trusts and foundations as well. So I was just saying that it's about being funding ready to apply for grants, which is obviously different to loans, but I wouldn't necessarily say that getting a grant is free money, because obviously you have to deliver what you've said you're going to do. And the money comes in. If it's a project, the money goes out on that project. So it's about funding ready for public grants, really. And I think the first thing is that you've got the passion. There's something around kind of the P's, they call it, the passion, the preparation, the planning, the persistence, all about becoming funding ready. And I think it's critical, really, that you know what you want to do and why you want to do it. You're not just thinking, oh, that's free money, I'll apply for that grant. It's really about what you have in your mind, and does what you want to do and why you want to do it match this funding criteria. Is to make sure that you can write a one-page proposal. So that's the first thing, that you've got the idea, that you've got the passion. I'd always go with that as well. I think that if you're trying to fit your idea into a funding grant, then you need to keep coming back to your core idea. So as long as you've got that, that's the absolute start, really. And then it's being prepared. A good proposal will be a result of work you've already done, in a way that there's things already in your mind. So in terms of doing the preparation, the planning, you need to really think about what your success is going to look like. Where are you now? Where do you want to get to? And is doing this project or receiving this grant the right thing to do? And how will this project help you on that journey as well? And finally, I think as well, in terms of being funding ready, it's just about thinking about your budget as soon as possible, really. Writing down everything you need in order to do the project, or for the grant. And I would say to put down almost a wish list, because you can always strip it back, but be really clear about what you need and have a budget in mind as soon as you can, because that often dictates what kind of grant you're going to go for. So with the Arts Council, there's an under £15,000 opportunity and an over, and it is linked to your planning, because the decisions are made at different time scales. So I do think once you've got your idea and you've got your one-page proposal and you know why you want to do it, to come up with a budget as soon as possible. And if you're new to applying to a public grant, then be realistic about your budget. And I think Bev talked about that when we were chatting before. She might want to add something to that.
Yeah, Bev, anything to add in terms of getting funding ready?
I think I'd echo what Tina said about taking a long-term view. I think if you can start not by looking if you can start by looking at what your organisation or you as a whole wants to achieve in the long term, then funding can play a part of that. But there's nothing worse than putting all of your efforts into a funding application that isn't actually going to get you where you want to be in the long term, because they do take an awful lot of effort to complete, and also time to implement if you get the funding. So you really need to have your eye on the long term, and if that, and even better if you can link that to your business plan over the long term, if you have one, which hopefully you will. So yeah, strategy is really important actually, because then the grant can work for you in numerous ways. It's not just about getting the money and being able to deliver that particular project. You're actually working towards the long term where you want to get to. So I think that's really important.
I suppose that plays into the point you were making, Tina, about being really clear about the why. Why do you want to do this? Why now? Why this project? And in terms of once somebody feels they've got an idea, they feel confident that it's going to help to get them where they want to be, and they've perhaps identified one or two funding opportunities. What are some of your key tips in terms of making a really compelling ask and a really compelling case for support? We start with you, Tina, and then we'll hear from Bev, and I'm sure Debbie will have a few reflections on that as well.
So I think the key thing is not to take anything for granted, not to assume that whoever's assessing it has got any prior knowledge. Because I've been on both sides, I've made an application, but I've also assessed applications. And I think, again, one thing we were just chatting through before we started recording was that if you can get someone else to read it for you that perhaps doesn't know the details of your project, because if you're writing it in a way that's very clear, that's very, it's not making any assumptions of prior knowledge. So I think that's a really important tip. To kind of get everything down as clearly as possible, and do state the obvious as well. I mean, I've read applications where I don't actually know what the ask is, kind of skirting all around it. But if it's that you want to, we are asking for a project to do this with this many artists here, state it, that is what the project is, be really clear. Another top tip is to bolster your claims as well, to clarify any information that you're providing. So, if you're going to say we are the best placed organisation to do this, you need to say why, because this is our experience, this is our track record, this is what we've done before, and this is why we want to do this now. And again, going back to having that business plan, that long-term vision. So you've got all that context. So it's like when people write, I am a hugely talented artist, and which I'm sure they are, but it's like you don't have to kind of say, these exhibitions, I've done this, or... So the final tip is, and it's another P to go with your planning and prep, is to be persistent. Persistence does work, and I think if you can build in enough time to reapply to a fund or get advice, talk to people, again, that's come up earlier, the importance of getting on the phone and chatting to someone. Just be persistent and patient, another P, and not planning time to resubmit, to take as much advice as you can. But also, if you do get rejected, not to take it personally. It can be incredibly competitive when you apply for a publicly funded grant. So, and I always say this when I'm doing the mentoring, that sometimes if you apply for something and you don't get it, it's proof that you're actually almost living, you're kind of living life to the fullest. You're not afraid to go for it. You've perhaps reached a bit too much, or it's not quite right, but don't be afraid of rejection, because it's serving that at least you're giving it a try, and you can always learn from it. So that's a real top tip I say to people. They're not there to try and trip you up, these funders. They want to fund really good projects and ambitious projects and exciting projects. So never be afraid to go for it, and always be persistent. If there's something that perhaps you weren't clear about and that's the reason you didn't get it, you can get that feedback and reapply. So they're my top tips for writing a compelling funding application, really.
That's amazing. Thanks, Tina. Bev, what would you add to that? Is there any experience as an advisor and through Harlem?
I think I always try and put myself in the position of the person who's reading the bid, and I've never been in that situation, but I can imagine that you get hundreds, and you have to some way stand out. And I think one of the things that is really important in that regard is putting the context in, so that it's really clear why your idea is important at this particular time, or why it's needed, or what change it's going to make. But that context, so the funder won't necessarily know why it's important to you unless you really spell that out. And so when we've had success at Harlem, we've been able to articulate why a particular project has been important at that point in time, and not just important to us as an organisation, but important to society for at that point in time. I think that's crucial, and I think you need to stand out in some way. It doesn't really matter how you approach this, but you might approach it because your ideas are very ambitious, for instance, or you might approach it because you demonstrate that you've done a lot of work already that has built a following or has demonstrated a need. But if you can find a way that's going to that your application is going to shine, I think is absolutely crucial, because it is very competitive, and you have to be memorable. And I think also it's so important that it's really well written. Getting a number of people to read it can feel very laborious, because inevitably they're going to come back with changes, and it feels like you're rewriting the thing over and over and over again. But it's only ever going to add to it hopefully in a way that is going to make it better. But it has to read beautifully at the end. It has to be something that your assessor really wants to back, because you've made a compelling argument. I think those are those are the things that I would add.
We know that quite a high number of our participants on this particular programme are dyslexic, so actually the act of writing an application can be quite challenging. Tina, from your experience, what kind of support people might get with the actual writing of something once they've perhaps gone through the process of getting their ideas down and getting some feedback?
Yeah,
any support for that?
Yes, so I know that the Arts Council do offer some support. So if you do have any specific needs, if I think dyslexia is one of them, where you can get support, so that someone can help you with the application process. And I've assisted a couple of artists over the years with that. So I think if that's something that you want to pursue, then if you just go to the Arts Council's website, I think it's called Access Support, and it tells you there the steps that you need to go through to try and secure some support if needed, really. So it's definitely there for the Arts Council. I'm not sure about other trusts and foundations, but I imagine that there are services. I don't know whether any of the other panelists know of any, but I imagine, the Citizens Advice Bureau, or there must be organisations that will support people that do need help with filling out forms, because yes, they can be incredibly laborious and quite a challenge to a lot of people.
That's really helpful, thank you.
I would have thought, Ellen, it's something that we can support through Real Creative Futures, is it not?
We can, yes, in theory, absolutely, yes. And we have, many brilliant bid writers in our company right now. So yeah, that is absolutely something that we can support.
Can I add something? Just on the importance of contacting the funder to find out whether there's support available. Just the importance of contacting a funder anyway, to run your idea by them. If they have if there is an opportunity for you to. I've been called. Thank you, Elspeth.
Lunchtime.
Lunchtime. Where was I?
Calling funders.
Yeah, it's the funders are there to give you money, and they would really like to read applications that are relevant to them and crafted in a way that is going to make their life easier. So if you have the opportunity, because they advertise it, do speak to funders. You can very quickly run an idea by them and get a feel for whether it's going to be something that they're interested in, and it's well worth doing, because it can put you on the right track if you were slightly off, or if you need to rethink entirely. You haven't wasted any of that time. So I think speak to people.
That's brilliant, thank you. They were all of my main question, guys, but I think before we round up, I wondered if you would each just having listened to each other there, and there's perhaps other things that we didn't cover, I'd just like to ask you all just to offer a final, really, and it might just be reiterating something that was already mentioned, but I wondered if there was a final reflection that you might offer to our viewers and listeners and readers on this subject of money, cash flow and funding.
I've got something, which is that I think my own experience of this through Harlem is that people really understand that this is a very difficult time for people. And so if you pick up the phone and you have those conversations with people you owe money to, or people that you need money from, or people that you can't afford to pay, actually people in my experience so far, people have been incredibly understanding and very supportive. It is an unprecedented time, and it makes, for a lot of people, it makes sense for them to support you through this so that you continue to be there as a client or whatever, in the same way that you need to get through this as well. So I think building those relationships and with people is so important at this time, and you may be surprised at what comes from it. Actually, I know that I have been.
That's amazing, thank you. Debbie, what would your reflections be?
Yeah, before I kind of make that comment, I'm dyslexic, so it was just really great to hear the guys talking about that. And I think just reflecting about some of the coping mechanisms that I have, is that actually identifying kind of people that you can reach out to, who you can trust to support you with proofreading. And I actually, my boyfriend, he makes notes when I'm talking, because I'm easier with that. And I think what you've got to do when you have dyslexia is actually really confront that you've got a little bit more work to do to communicate what you need to do. And if you're not able to kind of talk about your ideas verbally, which might be easier, you've just got to kind of make time to invest in writing that down, and just fully expect that you're going to have additional support to make sure that you're not misinterpreted, or you're not communicating actually what your vision is. And I think kind of just accessing as much support as you can, and reaching out to people, but having that in place really, not just now when you're making a funding application, but throughout business. We have a copywriter who supports us with content, because I just would never put anything out on the internet without it being read first, because I know that it might not even make sense, so but yeah, it can take a while to actually think that's something that I can't do, but it does kind of link into sort of the things that I kind of think maybe rounding stuff up. But for me, it has been about reaching out to for support and actually seeking it out. And I think sort of, getting your training, because there's a lot of upskilling going on for me at the moment, and support in place, just making sure that you've got that support and community around you. You know, Nottingham is just really well known for sort of the amount of support there is from, obviously, from you guys and from us as mentors, but also from the universities as well. There's a lot of really great projects happening that are really being accelerated, and actually maybe eligibility might not have been available for smaller businesses, but they are being more flexible because they know that the reach has to go a bit further. So I think kind of, you know, communication, negotiating, you know, keep talking to people, because this isn't over yet. You know, you're going to be having those conversations potentially way into next year. So I think kind of building good relationships and having good conversations with people is really important right now. And I think to echo what the ladies have also said, is that people are, you know, we're all in this, it's happening to everybody. It's not exclusive to your business. But I think, yeah, kind of your business and your peer networks, also reaching out to official channels. You know, I'm signed up to the government website, the Nottingham City, I'm signed up to them all. And also, I think, you know, sort of connecting with organisations that are helping you understand what's being handed down by government, because they're talking in a way that maybe I don't understand what they're saying. So I think kind of this is what's great about Real Creative Futures, is that it can kind of help funnel that information so it kind of makes sense to people. But yeah, I mean, I think keep talking and you know, build that community for yourself.
That's great, thank you. And finally, Tina, do you have any final reflections?
Just to echo what everyone else has said, you know, there's some fantastic support out there. I think me working, I kind of almost offer a translation service sometimes when I'm writing funding bits. And I think the key thing is that funders aren't looking to trip you up. They're not looking to not fund you. They're looking for a way to fund you, I think. And absolutely, pick up the phone, you know, talk to them. There is some great support services, and you know, that's why we're all here with Real Creative Futures. And as well, and it's that persistence, I think, and not taking rejection personally. There is finite resources, there just is, and there's always going to be more people applying for something than they've got money to allocate. But I think, you know, don't take rejection personally. See it that you've actually at least gone for it and learn from it, and you know, if you need to get the feedback, refine it, reapply, you know, if it's right for you. And I do like to end on that, because a lot of people are quite scared. I think sometimes it's especially if you're new to it, you know, and it's kind of, you read it and you think, oh, you know, they're looking to trip me up, catch me out, and it's really not like that. And there is support out there, so you know, have a look on the websites, give people a ring, and all of that. Stay safe.
Amazing. Thank you guys. I'm going to bring you back to, so we can see all of your faces before we say goodbye. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. There's so much rich content there, and I know our viewers and readers will really appreciate it. So we're just going to bring this to a close now. So thank you, Bev, thank you, Debbie, thank you, Tina, and you can look forward to seeing yourselves online very soon.
Okay, thank you.